We are pleased to welcome Shin Imai to the Critical Research Laboratory at Osgoode Hall. Professor Imai is a distinguished researcher and lecturer at Osgoode Hall, and he's conducted a number of very insightful research projects into the actions of Canadian mining companies abroad. And so we'd like to welcome you, Shin, and I'll just ask you a couple of questions.
Okay, thank you very much.
So, could you explain some of your research into the activities of Canadian mining companies in Guatemala or foreign jurisdictions more generally?
I started partly because I started hearing these stories of very serious human rights abuses and looking at how, what mechanisms there are to address these abuses. And in Canada, being in the law school, one always thinks about courts and a variety of legal mechanisms that one can use. What I discovered is that, it's a bit of a surprise to me, is that it's very difficult to think in those terms about what mechanisms exist. Partly because some of the regimes in those countries are very weak and vulnerable to pressure by companies and countries supporting those companies that are making investments. And so it's difficult to find sometimes domestic avenues. And if you look beyond that to either the international sphere or to look at some of the voluntary corporate social responsibility codes or enforcement in the home states where these companies are based, they were all very not well developed and very weak at this point.
So Shin, what role do you suppose that the home state would play in enforcing ethical conduct of corporations overseas, and what arm of the government would you say would be responsible for that?
Well, there's basically two ways you can do it. So you can have legislation that will monitor or provide some kind of avenue of redress at the home state level for a company a Canadian company that's operating overseas, and some places have such legislation. The United States, England. The other way is that you just use general tort or basically tort principles to hold Canadian companies who commit certain torts overseas in Canadian courts. In Canada, we tried to get legislation. It didn't go anywhere, and lost by 6 votes, which is, I think, significant, but significantly close to having some kind of monitoring mechanism. And so far, the courts have not accepted a single case. Various cases have been, maybe 4 or 5 cases have been brought in Canada relating to operations of Canadian mining companies overseas, and they haven't accepted a single one of them. Which is interesting. A former Justice of the Supreme Court of Canada, Ian Binney, who's been speaking out on this, was very emphatic about this very problem. There was a case called Anvil Mining, which just went up to the Supreme Court of Canada, and they refused leave to appeal. And commenting after that case, Ian Binney said, because he's no longer on the bench, he said that, there's some acts that are so repugnant that we have to rethink our current law. And he used the word repugnant, very strong words, and I think that hopefully, we're going to get a bit more sense of consciousness of the seriousness of what's happening.
So Shin, what are some of the barriers that the courts are coming up against in taking jurisdiction over some of these cases, or say hearing these cases to begin with?
Well, in Canada, there's 3 main ways that these cases are being kept out. And I won't go into the technical details of them, but one of them is that there's a lack of jurisdiction, that there's not enough connection with what happened in Canada to merit a court in Canada hearing the case. And the best example of that is Anvil Mining, which is the case that I just talked to you about that Ian Binney commented on. This was a case, it's an Australian company. The particular mining company provided logistical support to the army in the Democratic Republic of Congo, which went in on rumors that there were some rebels in the area. They committed a massacre of 73 people. A whole bunch of people were displaced, and the United Nations basically documented the involvement of Anvil Mining in providing airplanes, food, drivers, trucks, like the logistical support for the army to go in and commit this massacre. And the head of Anvil Mining admitted it. What happened is that the Canadian court said, no, we don't have jurisdiction. They had a little office in Canada. The head office was in Australia. They couldn't proceed in Australia because the people in the Congo were afraid to give affidavits. Within the Congo, the people, the villagers got no compensation. There were a couple of soldiers convicted, but they were reintegrated back into the army. And Anvil, meanwhile, the profits rose from 29 million before the massacre to 69 million after the massacre. So there was nothing happened at all to Anvil. In fact, they profited from this. And I think that is, as Ian Binney would say, it's repugnant. There's certain things that as Canadians, as societies, that we've decided is repugnant. Pedophilia, for example. That is so repugnant, makes us so sick, that if a Canadian went over and committed that act overseas, they come back to Canada, we prosecute them. We can do that. So I think that we have to start thinking about these acts and whether it's okay that everyone stand around, wash their hands, and people can be involved in massacres and their profits go up year by year.
Thanks very much, Shin. So what role does corporate social responsibility initiatives play right now in regulating the actions of corporations operating abroad?
I think that it's great that there are corporate social responsibility mechanisms, both internationally and within many corporations. They have their human rights policies. Some of them have indigenous rights policy. I think those things are all fantastic. I think that the next step, and I'm not, things take time, and I'm not criticizing the fact that people have them. I think the next step, though, is we have to look at enforceability. Like, how do we make sure that the people live up to those things? Right now, the state, it's like we've got a voluntary code, and it's like having a voluntary code for the 401. It's letting people drive and have no OPP monitoring it. So it's great that there's a code, but what do you do with the outliers? The problem with CSR, there's two of them. Right now, one is that because they're voluntary, lots of companies don't adhere, and we got problems in Ontario. For example, the Prospector and Developers Association of Canada have guidelines on how you should consult with Aboriginal communities, but you get some of these juniors that just ignore it. And of course, PDAC can't do anything about it, and the government can't do anything about it. I mean, that's a problem. The second problem is, if you have all of these codes and there's still something happen, is the fact that you have a code a complete defense? I think not. We have this case, and this is what I did my research on, the latest one with Hudbay Minerals in Guatemala. And there's very serious allegations. A community leader that was concerned about the mine was murdered. Another one has been left as a paraplegic. 11 women claimed that they were gang raped. Hudbay, meanwhile, says that it didn't happen or that they weren't involved. Okay, so that's fine. You got two different stories. Hudbay is like they're up to their neck in CSR principles. They've got maybe, I don't know, 6 or 12 internal, and they've signed up to everything that you could find externally. That's great that they do that. But now we got a credibility problem, like who's telling the truth? And I think that in those kind of situations, like in Canada, what we would do is, okay, well, that's what you have a judge for. That's why we have a court system. We don't let the guy with the money always win, you know. So I think that this is why we need to look at the enforceability and the accountability within Canada to look at that. And unfortunately, Hudbay and all these corporations are trying to keep things out of Canadian courts. And this is what Ian Binney has noticed, and in this case, for example, they're using something called forum non-convenience, which is, you know, Canadian courts might have jurisdiction, but it's better tried in Guatemala. That's the line that they're using.
Thank you, Shin. So one of the issues with that, obviously, is that then the Guatemalan courts won't necessarily take the case either, because there's all the pressures from the corporations. So it seems like governments are a little bit hamstrung, and to the extent that the CSR policies that corporations have are ineffective at regulating their behavior, do you see a role in the future for some kind of emerging transnational legal order that would impose, I guess, sanctions on corporations when they behave like this in foreign jurisdictions?
Yeah, that's a great question. Transnational legal order. I think that's, I can't really comment on that. I think that's why we have graduate students to kind of think about those large questions. Right now, I think that I'm not answering your question directly, but right now, I think that the only real break is whether they're losing money or not. So the Hudbay, for example, you know, after they got sued, they originally bought the mine for $446 million, and then they had to sell it a couple of years later for $176 million. Radius Gold, another Canadian mining company in Guatemala, somebody was at a blockade, and one of the community leaders was going home, and she was murdered. The Talisman has recently had to pull out of Peru. And so it's those types of, you know, when they lose money, I mean, I think then that investors kind of perk up their ears. But I think that there has to be more than that. I think it's a moral question. I mean, if pedophilia is a moral question, then the fact that people are being murdered or that there's gang rapes, I think is a moral question that we as Canadians have to face. And I think that there aren't the mechanisms right now to do it. I don't know if the transnational legal order is the way to go, or whether it's more acceptance at the domestic level of monitoring those things. But I think, you know, definitely we have to step forward. And I'm not saying that Hudbay is wrong. They may be right. I'm saying that the fact that they have all these corporate social responsibility mechanisms does not actually answer the factual question about whether they were negligent or whether these events happened or not. That we need another mechanism to do that.
And so do you see a role later on then for like some kind of international cooperation, like say between governments? Like what role do, I guess, current regimes that govern the relations among states play in perhaps holding Canadian corporations accountable?
Well, I'm not, the mechanisms that I know about, I think, are at present highly problematic. Probably the strongest kind of international, transnational law mechanism right now is not the United Nations. It's the Inter-American Court of Human Rights and the Inter-American Commission of Human Rights. And countries that have signed on to that in the Americas, the court can actually make a decision that's binding on the countries. And the court is made up of representatives of a whole bunch of countries in Latin America. And they do make decisions about whether projects should go ahead or not, that kind of thing. So that's the strongest. And it's been quite influential. Two problems with that. One is that the countries in Latin America, because it's an international mechanism, although technically binding, can ignore it, or they can just withdraw. And Brazil got criticized for a huge dam, and they just said, well, screw you, we're leaving. Another problem is Canada and the United States don't adhere to the system. So a court, they don't even recognize the court. And so I think we got a problem there as well. I mean, you can talk about a transnational mechanism, but the states have to sign on to it.
So that was very interesting, Shin. Thank you very much for coming in here today and sharing your research with us and all of the viewers of the website. And we very much appreciate your insight and your continued dedication to human rights causes all over the world and holding corporations, especially in Canada, accountable for their actions in foreign jurisdictions. Thank you.